Well, the other day I noticed what is something of a little bit of a milestone in terms of gun rights in the United States. Illinois has finally been forced by the federal judiciary, actually, to allow for concealed carry. Um, for those of you who don't know, there has been a sweeping change across the majority of the country in the last 20 years in regards to um, how people can carry firearms legally, um, in a concealed or in an open fashion. Just a little bit of the history. Um, if you go back far enough, there were no restrictions about open carrying, that is a gun that's visible, or concealed carrying, that is a gun that you can't see when you carry it. And then over the course of time, municipalities, first municipalities like cities, started banning um, concealed carry. The idea being that um, if you are concealing a gun, there's something suspicious about it. That's a potential criminal intent. Open carry tended not to be banned nearly as often, um, and eventually you had entire states in putting restrictions on concealed carry. Many of them completely banned it. Others allowed it under certain conditions. If you could get a license, but it was usually very prohibitive. You had to be a security guard or have political connections, but it was very difficult. But then, basically, when the crime wave was starting to really get bad in the 70s, many people began agitating for the right to carry a weapon with them. Now, open is interesting. Open carry was not banned in many places, and a few places like Texas and Oklahoma. But actually, in many states, since the practice was so uncommon, it was never actually banned. However, there are reasons that open carry is. There's reasons open carry is a good idea, and there's reasons why open carry is a bad idea. And many people who are primarily focused on self-defense are not keen on open carry. So there became a movement to liberalize, so to speak, concealed carry laws to make it easier for people to conceal carry. And I'm told that Georgia was the first state to really kind of start this, and then Florida. And then within the last 15 years, it's basically spread to everywhere but a few states. Um, Now, there's a couple different gradations of concealed carry. Um, the lowest one would be it's completely unallowed under any circumstances, non-carry, of which Illinois was the last such state. You can't open or conceal carry was the story in Illinois. Then there's what's called discretionary or may issue. These are places that have permits. It's legal to conceal carry, but only if you get the permit. And the permit is discretionary on on the whim of some authority, usually a sheriff, but some of the worst states have it on every level of bureaucracy. So, from your local sheriff to the state police to all the way to the governor could say, no, you can't have it. Um, in practice, discretionary issue varies quite a bit. Like in California, it has discretionary issue where the sheriff gets to decide. And if you live in some of the more rural, gun-friendly areas, it's not difficult to get a concealed carry permit. If, however, you live in Orange County or some of the other more liberal counties, it is simply impossible. They will deny everybody, unless you're Tom Cruise or Dianne Feinstein, probably the biggest hypocrite when it comes to guns that there is. But then in a place like Alabama, it's my understanding Alabama has discretionary issue, or at least had for a long time, and there they basically would give it to anybody. The next grade above discretionary issue is shall issue. Shall issue means that they have to give you the permit to anyone who qualifies. So there's no, I don't think you should have it if you do whatever the requirements are, and usually they are that you do not be a felon. There usually is some kind of, you have to complete so many hours of training, although not necessarily. If you do those things, they have to give you a permit. And then the top spectrum, which is kind of just starting to spread out also, is so-called constitutional carry, or basically anyone can carry and they don't even need a license whatsoever. You can just conceal carry and you don't need to ask anyone. Vermont has always been this way, despite its liberal leanings. Other states that are like this are Alaska, Arizona, and Wyoming, I believe. I might be wrong about that, but um, so for a long time, Illinois did not allow either concealed, or open carry at all. Both were completely banned. And in a lesson for liberals about the potential pitfalls of federal hegemony, the federal government basically said that that's unconstitutional. I had not been following this case at all. When I saw the headlines that concealed carry was repealed in Illinois, I believed initially that this must be because the, the state government there in Springfield eventually had passed a law, and that was only partially correct. Um, Many people, most of Illinois geography-wise, and a big part of its population is essentially rural Midwest farmers who are very interested in guns. However, the northern part of Illinois is dominated by Chicago. Cook County, where Chicago is the second most populated county in the country, and Chicago, this is quite ironic, um, is totally against guns and tries to restrict them, and it kind of lectures the some more southern counties about, you know, how how unenlightened they are, which is ironic given how much violence there is in Chicago and how corrupt it is there. Uh, but they basically had the political power to prevent this from ever happening. Um, there have been several times where laws have been passed that the governor has vetoed, but usually there isn't even the legislative power to get things passed. I remember a couple years ago there being very large marches, like in the Capitol, of people agitating for this, thousands and thousands of people. Um, the NRA basically set their sights on Illinois after the previous. There used to be Wisconsin also used to not allow concealed carry up until maybe 3 or 4 years ago, and after they caved as well, Illinois became the single state, and I think the NRA decided that they were going to um, get a clean sweep, so to speak. Well, these legislative efforts all failed. Uh, Now, eventually, I think they would have succeeded. It was only going to take the right Congress or the right governor. They were consistently trying repeatedly. That I think, and at this point, it was getting ridiculous. You know, they could make the argument that it's not safe or whatever, but every other state in the country has concealed carry. So, you know, it, it, it's strange credulity to assume that it can't be allowed in Illinois, but it can be allowed everywhere else, including urban centers that are as large as Chicago. Um, so what actually ended up happening is after the D.C. versus Heller case, and then after the Chicago versus McDonald case, the D.C. Heller case said that they can't ban all the guns in District of Columbia. Um, the Chicago case was Chicago had a handgun ban. And the Supreme Court said that you can't have a handgun ban either. Uh, Although I think Chicago is still making it almost impossible to get a handgun. However, as soon as that happened, apparently people began legal action saying, okay, then they can't have a blanket ban on carry also. And eventually, this never made it to the Supreme Court, but eventually made it all the way to the 7th District Court, 7th Federal Circuit, 7th Court of Appeals, and the judge there said that it is illegal to ban all kinds of carry categorically. And so he basically gave them until, like, I think June 1st, and he said if you don't have it done by that, you have until then to establish concealed carry. And the legislature then passed a bill, but the governor vetoed parts of it. This is interesting. The executive in Illinois, the governor of Illinois, he not only can he veto bills, but he can do amendatorial vetoes. So he can veto a simple part of the bill. And I guess it makes sense that the Lincoln state would have a really powerful executive in that regard. And the governor was vetoing the crap out of these bills, and then suggesting things, basically saying that, yes, we'll allow concealed carry, but it will only be allowed in places that specify that they will allow it, and it will be banned every place else. That there only be one gun allowed per person, blah, 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 blah. All these were rejected, and eventually the judge actually had to, this is interesting to show you how not binding. The judge gave them another month to think about it because they hadn't figured it out by his first deadline, which is interesting. I wonder how many times you and I would get extensions for however long we needed to work out our violations of the constitutions. But the state of Illinois got as many as it needed. And then just a couple days ago, um, the legislature was able to override the veto, the amendatory veto of the governor, and they got concealed carry. And instead of may issue, which I thought might be what you would get, it is actually a shall issue situation. Anyone who is qualified in the state must be issued a concealed carry. Now, the requirements for the qualification are fairly draconian as far as it goes. First of all, Illinois has already one of the strictest state gun laws in the country, just for buying firearms generally, never mind concealed carry. You have to get a firearms card. This is very similar to the registration scheme that they have in Australia. I was just talking to a friend of mine who lives in Illinois, and he was talking about, I'm thinking about maybe getting a gun. I was it's just easy. Just go buy a shotgun. And then I said, yeah, it's actually, I don't know what it entails to get these cards in Illinois. I think that they are, man, I think that they have to give them to you if you qualify. But it's still bullshit that you should have to go and get some kind of licensure card before you can go buy a shotgun or a rifle or a handgun for that matter. Um, and so they the requirements are that I think you have to have like 16 hours of training. You have to have the card. You can't be a felon. And then they also mandated, they gave the state police, the Illinois State Police, 6 months to figure out how they're going to process the applications and whatnot. Which they are then saying means that it is not legal yet. It won't be legal until it won't actually be legal until the state police have, um, actually given out the permits. But in another interesting twist, the prosecutors in about 14 counties have gone to the state police in their county and said, allow people to conceal carry. Anybody you arrest for carrying, if they would meet the requirements that have been specified by the law, will not be prosecuted. So don't even bother, which is interesting. I wish that they would be that sensible in regard to all types of legislation. So this is part of a growing trend that most of the country, with exceptions like New York and California and Connecticut, New Jersey, and it's pretty much the main ones, in Illinois, guns are becoming, gun rights are basically, if they haven't won this battle, this war, they're very close to it. You know, for me, it's a visceral issue. It hits right on a nerve. It it has very strong, deep libertarian undertones, but yet it's widely accepted through the rest of the society. And the federal government and people in government generally, they have an innate will to power and a desire to regulate things and to tax things and to control things. And this is something in particular that it has a direct influence on their relative power to the rest of society. And I don't care if it's Republicans or Democrats, they are all, in their hearts, in favor of gun control. However, the political backlash, and the NRA is a part of this. It's unlike the propaganda against them. They're not the creators of it all. They are harnessing an enormous sentiment to the contrary. And this has made gun control politically impossible in most of the country, and indeed at the federal level. This last year we've had a Democratic-controlled federal government with a slew of high-profile mass shootings. The situation is tailor-made for more gun control, and yet there was no new gun control, none. In fact, at the state level, there's considerably less. Now, again, there's exceptions to this, including in Colorado there was one, but the governor in Colorado is about to get impeached for doing that, apparently, among other retributional changes. I know since I've begun buying firearms, I never even touched a gun until I was like 23. The ease of buying them has increased in my state. In my state, buying a shotgun or a rifle was always just anyone could do it. But on handguns, there used to be you used to need to get what was called a permit to purchase. You could not just walk into a store and buy a handgun. You had to first approach the state authorities, whether it was the county sheriff or a city police or a state police office, whoever was in your jurisdiction, which could be kind of complicated if you lived in a rural area, and say that you wanted to buy a handgun, at which point they would administer a test. It was a very easy test. It was a 10 true or false question test that you had to do 75% or better. And if you succeeded, they would give you a permit, which would expire in 10 days. You then have to go to the place you wanted to buy a gun, and if you asked to buy a handgun, they would ask for either a permit to purchase or your concealed carry license. So there is a thing, if you got the concealed carry permit, you were allowed to just use that as your permit to purchase. Then after you'd bought the gun, you had to bring the gun, and the gun dealer would create a form in triplicate, one copy for them, one for you, and one for the state police. You would then take one copy of that triplicated form and your gun to the police department, which is very awkward taking a handgun to a police station, where they would do a quote security check or a safety check. They would look at the gun to make sure that it wasn't going to explode, but that was just the excuse for passing the law. The law was actually initially intended to keep blacks from getting guns. Uh, you have this law that requires a safety inspection. If you were white, your gun would pass. If you were black, they would take your gun and say didn't pass the safety inspection. Um, it was also really a backdoor to registration, which is what's still going on. Um, but the first two handguns I bought, I had to go through all of that process. The third handgun I bought, uh, again, I had to go get a permit to purchase. And this was only like a year and a half ago, 2 years ago. I had to get a permit to purchase. Bought the gun, and then the people at the sheriff's department said, you don't have to bring the gun in, just bring back the form. Um, which is still a hassle, but it's not as much of a hassle as it had been previously. And then 2 weeks ago, on a whim, my brother said, hey, I want to go to a new Cabela's. They opened a new Cabela's about an hour from our house. He was going to go on a fishing trip with some of his friends. He needed to stock up on supplies, and he didn't want to make the trip alone. So I said, oh, sure, whatever. So I went to Cabela's with him, and I, of course, was looking at the gun section, and I saw a nice handgun that I liked, and I had spoken at another retailer who said the laws had changed and he no longer needed a permit to purchase. So I asked the dealer if that was indeed the case. He said, "Yep, you don't need a permit to purchase. You just buy it right here. We'll fill out the triplicate form, and you just turn in the form." So it's not perfect. I'm not lauding it as like, oh, this is great. The state police are still registering handguns, although it seems like a complete absurdity at this point. Most states don't actually do that. Um, so my state, even though it was relatively easy, is slightly below the average in terms of buying a handgun. But it was very, very easy. Then all I had to do was take this form and drop it off at the police station, and that was it. There was no test. There was no um, when you buy from a dealer, there's a background check. Uh, But so even within my state, the laws have relaxed considerably, and the trend is that they'll continue relaxing because the whole idea of registering them in the first place is redundant. Most states don't do it. So that's where things are going. Now, at the federal level, sure, California and New York are big states, and they're anti-gun, but then Texas is actually bigger than New York, and that's a pro-gun state. And pretty much all the other major states, with the exceptions of New Jersey and Massachusetts, and Hawaii. Hawaii is pretty anti-gun too, but it doesn't really count. It's kind of balanced by Alaska, which is absurdly pro-gun. Uh, and so the federal government is actually now enforcing what would be considered NRA-style propaganda type anti-gun control measures on the rest of the country, which I think is an ironic lesson for uh, the liberals you know who are the priests of federal hegemony in this society. Another interesting thing is I read a Slate article about this. I'll try and put a link to it in the description. And they were basically saying this is a terrible idea because there is no evidence that um, that relaxing the restriction will have any effect on crime. This is kind of different. Normally, what we hear, the claim is that if, and this has happened in every state. Every time a state relaxed or liberalized its concealed carry laws, there'd be a hue and cry that this is going to cause blood in the streets. The crime will go up. That people will start killing each other. People get an offender bender, and they will come out and just engage in a shootout right there because they got a bumper, fender bender. And this, it really got to the boy who cried wolf level because it never materialized. Crime rates have been going down. Now, many gun advocates assert that this is because of the concealed carry. It might be a contributing factor, but it's very hard to prove because even states that weren't passing better, more liberalized gun control laws, we're seeing reductions in the crime. Many of them, anyway. So, like New York City has seen a reduction in crime, and they haven't liberalized their concealed carry laws. Um, That being said, the contrary argument that they cause violence is certainly disproven, or very close to disproven at this point. Um, and so this is actually a huge change in rhetoric, where the argument in this case by Slate was, well, there's no evidence that it does anything. The claim wasn't that it's going to cause crime to go up. The claim was it doesn't do anything, which is an interesting kind of philosophical way of looking at it, to say, well, we should maintain a ban on a practice or on a product, not because it's bad, but because we don't know that it would do anything. All the variable, they were ridiculous in their claims that there's no empirical evidence. There's massive empirical evidence, although making sense of it, I would grant, is difficult and problematic. Um, Concealed carry has been liberalized in almost all the states, now. Well, it hasn't been liberalized in all the states. Some of them are still may issue and aren't getting any more liberal, but most of them have. And there is no evidence that it causes a rise in crime. Um, so this is interesting that they're basically saying they're based they're the editor's take was basically, this is what would be a good word, they're being foolhardy. They're basically legalizing something they don't know what the effects are going to be. So at the end of the article, he's kind of like, so let's hope that they're right, or that they got lucky or something. So the de facto position of the Slate editors is that things should be banned and regulated, that the state should de facto have control over things, even if there is no evidence that that control is warranted. The typical argument is, well, we need to have state control because there's negative externalities that will take place if it doesn't have control. And from a utilitarian point of view, that's an argument you can make. However, if you're going to say there's no utilitarian argument for this one way or the other, yet the state should still retain control, shows that, in your view, everything comes from the government, that the government should control everything, and that the de facto default position should be one of government control and hegemony over the rest of society, that the de facto position should be that they run everything. I wonder how consistent they are in this approach if they apply it to things like drugs or prostitution, or any number of other liberal bugaboos, or if it's just guns that they think the de facto should be that they should not be allowed, that they should be restricted. But again, people usually say they should be restricted because they cause crime, and so if they're saying they don't think there's any evidence that they cause crime, then why should they be restricted then? That begs the question, why shouldn't people be free if they think that they need them? And people use guns for all kinds of different reasons. Some people have legitimate self-defense concerns, and third parties are not in a position to prejudge, especially without knowing any of the details, whether that makes sense or not. However, there are other reasons to own guns besides self-defense. And I think the burden of proof should be on someone else, a third party, to indicate why that shouldn't be the case. Slate feels that they don't need evidence that it should be banned anyway, just probably because, they probably have hoplophobia and they're afraid of guns, but they have just admitted in the article that there's no evidence that fear is justified. I mean, so they're almost admitting that they have a phobia, and that to indulge that phobia, we should not have gun liberties. People should not be free to own guns and carry them as they see fit. So this is a positive trend. I don't want to get too worked up about it, but this was something of a surprise. I knew eventually Illinois would have to cave, but I didn't think it would be this means. I didn't realize that it would come from the federal government, which of course I have mixed feelings about. Um, but it did happen, and my guess is that you're going to see now many of the states that are shall issue become constitutional carry. Um, it's getting introduced in many states now repeatedly, and it's going to start to pass in more of them as it already has. And uh, that will be interesting to see, which ones go next. There's about a dozen who are likely candidates for that, like Tennessee, Montana, Idaho, Utah. Um, so we will see, maybe Texas, um, what happens. The federal government's ability to do this. I think the only way they can really do gun control now is to do the back door, so to speak. So they can't do explicit gun control. But I wouldn't be surprised if something like Obamacare or some other federal mandate would be used to say, oh, well, you failed your mental health screening, so you can't get a gun, that sort of thing. I think that's where this battle is moved, because the rhetorical battle, the battle for the hearts and minds, I mean, granted, there are lots of liberals out there still, but they are outnumbered. If you go on to gun control videos, um, overwhelmingly the comments are in favor of gun control or in favor of gun rights. The number of people here's the other interesting kind of shift politically is, whereas 30, 40 years ago gun control was kind of an important plank in the Democratic platform, it no longer is. And I think what they realize is, it's a losing issue. If you become an outspoken proponent for gun control, you are not safe electorally, except in a few places. Like you can be for gun control if you live in New York or L.A. or Chicago, and a number of, I mean, not a small number of other places, but in many places, most of the country, that's very dangerous. And the other thing is, I think they realize that most of the Democratic constituents that they have, what they are imagining is they want a government that's giving them free health care. They want the benign socialist state. They don't want to they're not as interested in taking other people's guns. It's not as big an issue, even if many of them have kind of a feeling that that's what they feel better with. They're not motivated to do that, and so it doesn't make if it's, there are many pro-gun NRA Democrats, is basically what I'm saying, who could say, you know what, I'm not going to lose my Democratic base if I'm, good on the Second Amendment, quote unquote. Um, they're still going to vote for me as long as I'm for Obamacare or whatever, raising the minimum wage. That's what's going to give them my votes. And if I'm not anti-gun, then the NRA can't say anything against me. And you're right, that mollifies the right wing to a large extent. And so this bill in Illinois was co-sponsored and led by a Democrat from Southern Illinois. You know, so it's become an issue that the Democrats can't really. The only reason they can use gun control to their advantage is if they're anti-gun control, and then they're protected from the right. It gives them cred and it makes them more electable in a lot of ways. So that's been kind of a very interesting, slowly but steady development in the political politics of the United States. One that is not shown anywhere else in the first world, other than Switzerland. Um, all the other first world countries, there is essentially zero political will for gun control. I mean, even in Canada, Canada has to allow certain level of gun rights because they make billions of dollars from Americans taking their guns there to go hunting. Um, and Canada also is the inveterate ape of the United States. Uh, but even so, their Liberal Party is always trying to ban guns even more, and their Conservative Party is only able to maybe not allow that to happen. They never get to repealing, except for, I don't know, did they repeal the long gun registry? I heard that maybe they had. But in the UK, there's nothing like this. Australia or Germany or any other country that I'm aware of. Maybe New Zealand. I guess it's debatable, but it's not even a political issue. It's not even a big debate. The debate is people in the BBC trying to understand what's going on here, because they can't comprehend the idea that people be armed. They have a problem with people stabbing police officers in the street and giving speeches with their bloody hands. Uh, you know, because they don't even need a firearm to become a mass murderer there. So anyway, good news in that regard, I guess. Mildly good news, but still worth noting. So all right, that's it.